Joann Bontjes. Part 1. Biography. Joann Bontjes was born on May 11, 1954 in Benson, Minnesota, located in Swift County. She was the youngest child to parents B.J. Bontjes and wife, Wilma. She had two older brothers, James and Kenneth, and sister Linda. After settling in Butterfield, Minnesota for a time, the family moved to Sherburn in Martin County, Minnesota, and lived in an apartment above what at that time was the local post office. Joanne grew up with a strong work ethic. Even as young as 13, Joanne worked at the Highway Cafe in St. James, Minnesota with her mother, who managed the cafe, which was owned by a one Jimmy Johnson, who also owned the Deep Rock gas station. This was the first time that danger would enter Joanne's life. Johnson was a sexual predator and murderer. In 1970 he was convicted of murder in the third degree and kidnapping of 14-year-old Sandra Meinke. Joanne and Wilma both testified at his trial that he had been at the cafe getting a to-go order of French fries on the day the girl went missing. This was not the first incident of Johnson committing violent acts against women. His first known attack took place in Deer Park, Wisconsin on May 7, 1949. He assaulted teenage girls, Valois Esp and Janet Thode, in a brutal hammer attack and attempted kidnapping. Luckily, both girls survived, but Valois would be hospitalized for 2 weeks for a skull fracture. Incidentally, the cause of death for Sandra Meinke was a skull fracture. Johnson would be sentenced for a period not to exceed 40 years for murder in the third degree and kidnapping of Sandra Meinke. Although Johnson would be serving his sentence at the time of Joanne's murder, there were other unsolved murders of teenage girls and young women in Minnesota, but such incidents should be the focus for another episode. In high school, Joanne liked going to dances at the Fox Lake Ballroom, which was a popular venue for decades before it closed down and was demolished. She was a big fan of singer John Denver. She also worked on the high school yearbook and school plays. Her classmates described her as friendly and being a loyal friend. In fact, her loyalty brought her into conflict with the boyfriends of friends who Joanne believed wasn't treating them right. But even though Joanne showed concern over the relationships of her close friends, she herself did not date much and had no steady boyfriends during her school years and after graduation, preferring to go out with groups of friends. Joanne graduated from Sherburn High School in 1972. Her quote in the high school yearbook read, "Frequently with my brain I think a thought." On the wills page, Joanne wills her ability to get out of reading in Steno 2 class to the future Steno 2 girls. The prophecy page stated, "Joann Bontjes is now the head cook at Sherburn High School. We hear the kids are still complaining." Sadly, this prophecy would not come true, nor would Joanne's dreams of what she wanted to do in life. She wanted to be a beautician. She had always liked doing hair and experimenting with different hairstyles. While attending cosmetology school, Joanne and her friends started going to local baseball games in Trimont, Minnesota. She still did not date frequently, especially not going out with one person. Joanne did not want the drama or hassle of being tied down, especially while pursuing her goal of starting her own beauty shop. And she was on her way to achieving that goal. Joanne had been working at the Hair Affair at 14 North Main Street in Sherburn, but had recently quit to start her own salon. Most sources, in 1975 and still today, state that Jo's beauty shop was located downtown Sherburn. However, this is not the case. The mix-up may be due to Joanne recently leaving the Hair Affair. But the 1975 phone directory at the Martin County Historical Society shows that Jo's beauty shop was located at 142 South Manyaska, the private residence of Robert and Sue Whitehead. Sue Whitehead operated beauty salons in Sherburn and Lakefield, Minnesota. And Joanne was renting the shop at the Whitehead residence at the time of her murder. Joanne's family had been renting an apartment above the post office across the street from the Hair Affair. Articles at the time of the murder and sources of today state that But, according to the phone directory, the Bontjes residence was listed as 205 Kenzie at the time of her murder. Sources state that around the time of Joanne's abduction and murder, someone had been calling local beauty salons, making sexually suggestive remarks. It is unknown if the remarks were made at anyone in particular or if the person mentioned Joanne. But is it possible that someone stalking Joanne might have been confused by her recent moves to both different business and residential addresses? It has been suggested that Joanne had a potential client who made her feel uncomfortable. She declined his request for her to do his hair because he reportedly gave her the creeps. And this individual sometimes would be seen skulking about outside the salon. Some sources also state that Joanne did have a stalker, and also received unwanted attention from a classmate that she took pity on, perhaps due to his being bullied. Could this have been one person, the creepy customer, stalker, and harassing classmate? Or were they separate people? It has also been said that a police officer from Trimont had an attraction to her. But this person has been ruled out as a suspect. Joanne's loyalty to her friends would also bring unwanted and potentially dangerous people into her life. Joanne was threatened and harassed by the boyfriend of one of her best friends. Joanne did not approve of the way he was treating her friend. And she had reported him to the police for tampering with her friend's tires. It should also be noted that this individual has supposedly been cleared. In the next episode, we will be looking at the timeline of events leading to Joanne's abduction. Joann Bontjes. Part 2. Her last night out. October 1, 1975 was a warmer than normal day in Sherburn. After a day of working at her salon, Joanne had plans to go out with her friends. She climbed into her 1974 Chevy Vega Spirit of 76 model, a distinctive model, the only one in the area, and a vehicle she was known to own, and headed out for the night. She arrived at the Knights Lounge at Ormsby, Minnesota, where she had a drink with at least one friend. She then headed to the American Legion Club in Trimont, Minnesota. And at this location she would have the most interaction with witnesses, and not all of that interaction was good. She met with a potential buyer for her Vega. Seeing that Joanne was making further plans on expanding her business, she might have thought that monthly payments on a car could be better spent on her business. I've heard reports that Joanne may have gotten into an argument with a group of men playing pool. She supposedly messed the balls up, which drew some angry remarks and threats. She also may have exchanged words with the ex-boyfriend of one of her friends. This person may have been abusive to her friend. Also, it has been reported that Joanne had filed a police report on this person after witnessing him deflating her friend's tires. This person also reportedly threatened Joanne. It is possible that Joanne may have exchanged in loud banter across the crowded bar with a number of individuals. However, most of that is lost to history and may just be conjecture. Bar patrons were questioned at the time, and since then most suspects have been cleared, some recently by DNA. And we will look at DNA possibilities later. What is known is that Joanne left the Trimont Legion at around 12:30 a.m. on October 2, 1975. Witnesses claim they saw her briefly talking to a man outside the Legion. Officially, that is the last time she was seen before her body was found on October 3. However, unofficially she was seen later. One of the more perplexing elements of the Joann Bontjes case is the possibility that she was seen elsewhere after leaving the American Legion. Reports state that at around 1 a.m., Doug Lomack, a resident of Donnell, Minnesota, found Joanne stuck in a ditch on the outskirts of town near the former glassite plant. He helped her out of the ditch and stated that she then headed north on Highway 4 back toward Sherburn. Lomack gave a statement of his account to Donnell Police Chief Al Helmers and also reported it to the Martin County Sheriff's Department. No one from the Sheriff's Department ever questioned him. He maintained his story up until the time of his death, and Chief Helmers also believed his story was credible. Why did no one with the Sheriff's Department follow this up? This was a credible lead from a witness within a reasonable geographic distance from the Trimont American Legion, to Donnell, and back to the place her car was abandoned, near Trimont. But, regardless of what you believe, Joanne would not be seen again until around 3 p.m. on October 3rd. Let's look at the events of the next day and a half or so. Joann Bontjes. Part 3. The Search. On the morning of Thursday, October 2nd, 1975, Joanne's parents BJ and Wilma woke to find that Joanne hadn't returned. Joanne liked to go out, but they knew she had an early morning appointment at her salon. It wasn't like her to stay out all night. Still, Joanne was a responsible, adult woman. Maybe she had stayed with a friend. Wilma called Joanne's salon. They became worried when Joanne didn't answer the phone. Wilma called several of Joanne's friends, but they hadn't seen her since she left the Trimont American Legion at around 12:30. Then they heard a knock on the door. It was Ben Seifert, a local druggist, who informed them that he had seen Joanne's car parked on the side of Highway 4 when he was making an early run to Trimont. The car was still parked there on his way back. He stopped to check it out and noticed Joanne's shoes on the shoulder near the front tire. BJ and one of Joanne's brothers drove to the Vega, finding it about 2 miles south of Trimont. It was parked facing south on the west side of the highway, as it should have been if she was heading back to Sherburn. As Seifert had told them, Joanne's shoes were sitting on the shoulder near the left front tire. All tires were inflated. They found the doors unlocked and driver's side window rolled down. Checking inside, they found her purse and brown leather jacket, and the keys were in the ignition. They checked the ignition, and the car started without any problem. They also saw that the fuel gauge showed gas in the tank. In front of the Vega, they saw tire tracks as if another vehicle had pulled up in front of it. Looking closer at her shoes, they noticed 2 parallel ruts dug into the gravel of the shoulder leading away from her shoes. It appeared as if someone had pulled Joanne out of them and dragged her away. Could her shoes have dug the ruts before they fell from her feet as she was being dragged toward the vehicle that left tracks in front of her car? Could she have been lifted from her shoes and her bare feet dug the ruts as she was pulled to another vehicle behind her car that left no seen tire tracks? Did the tire tracks even have anything to do with Joanne's abduction, or had they been left at another time? Were photographs or castings made of the tire tracks? The contents of her purse appeared intact: checkbook, money, makeup, cigarette lighter, cigarettes, half a pack of Marlboro 100s, Joanne's brand. They saw more cigarettes on the dash, Salem menthols. Sitting in the center console was an open bag of red-shelled pistachio seeds, and a number of pistachio shells littered the car. They rushed to call the authorities and reported Joanne missing at 9:40 a.m. But the official response from law enforcement was delayed due to the Martin County Sheriff's Department assisting the authorities of neighboring Jackson County to the west on another murder case. In days to come, many people would come forward stating they had seen Joanne's car parked on the shoulder before Ben Seifert noticed it and contacted Joanne's parents. One woman even claimed she had seen a car turn around and drive up in front of the parked Vega. Doesn't it seem strange that a car would be parked along a well-traveled highway for several hours without attracting the attention of authorities? You would think there would be more routine patrols along a well-traveled highway. Obviously not willing to wait for the law, Joanne's family formed their own search parties and began going throughout the nearby fields, ditches, and gravel roads. Finally, investigators joined the search by Thursday afternoon, extending the search to abandoned buildings and farms. And so the search ended on Thursday, October 2nd. The Bontjes family and volunteer searchers went back to their homes with worries and wonderings, no doubt making it a long, sleepless night. It was as if Joanne had vanished from the world. Friday, October 3, 1975, the search continued on land but also extended into the air. Martin County Sheriff Richard Evanson, Deputy Gerald Nutt, and a state trooper pilot, Don Keepers, met to plan an air search of the area. While Keepers scanned the countryside in his plane, further examination of the car showed no blood or damage. The Vega did not appear to have been forced off the road. It had been calmly and deliberately parked. It is not known who parked Joanne's Vega. She could have herself, or perhaps the person who abducted and then murdered her had already subdued Joanne at another location, drove her to Highway 4, and then transferred her to another vehicle. So there is the possibility that more than one person took her. I assume that investigators dusted the Vega completely for fingerprints, especially the steering wheel, door handles etc. Much has been said about DNA samples and testing, but unknown fingerprint samples could also be compared with suspects. Also, it would be important to note if the Vega showed any evidence of someone wiping it down to remove prints. Evidence of wiping down the steering wheel or driver's side door or door handle etc. could show that someone else had driven her car. And where were the pistachio shells found? Driver's side, passenger side, back seat. How was the bag of pistachio seeds sitting in the console, closer to the driver's seat or passenger seat? On what side of the dash was the pack of Salem menthols found, driver's or passenger side? This could help tell who was driving the car. Don't forget about her purse and jacket. Where were they? If they were in the back seat, it could show that she had a passenger, as most people would just toss their jacket into the passenger seat rather than having to dig it out of the back later. Now let's move on to where Joanne's body was found. Joann Bontjes. Part 4. The dump site. And investigation. Friday, October 3, 1975. Around 7 a.m., hours before Joanne's body was officially found, the man who would find her body, Don Faber, was eating breakfast with his son Don Jr. when they claimed to have heard a gunshot. This was the day before the start of duck season. The Faber farm is close to where Joanne's body would eventually be found. But yet the evidence we will soon be examining says Joanne was not killed where her body was found, yet she must have been murdered at a location where the lethal gunshot could be heard at the Faber farm. That is, of course, if the shot they heard was indeed the murder shot. That said, the estimated time of 7 a.m. does coincide with the estimation that Joanne had been dead for about 6 hours by the time she was found at around 3 p.m. And the location she was found was only about 2 miles west and then a quarter mile north from where her car was abandoned. It is possible that the geographic location in which Joanne was abducted, held, murdered, and dumped was only a few miles. Another account to examine is that a young boy riding the school bus said he saw a woman in the ditch that morning. He said nothing at the time, but later came forward when he heard about Joanne's murder. Looking at the distance from County Road 36 toward the general location Joanne's body would be found, the boy would not have any trouble seeing a body in the ditch, especially seated in a higher elevated vehicle such as a school bus. This area had been thoroughly searched the day before. And an air search would be conducted later that morning. And even though the Faber family and their hired hands would be harvesting the field, it would not be until around 3 p.m. when Don Faber would find her body. Authorities soon arrived, but their control of the crime scene quickly deteriorated. The area was not properly cordoned off. Too many sightseers congregated at the scene, possibly contaminating evidence, destroying it, or even removing it as ghoulish curiosity seekers sometimes do. Joanne was face down in the ditch and partially clothed, wearing bra and panties, although her panties had been pulled down around her ankles. Later autopsy reports stated that she had not been raped. She had bruises and abrasions on her body, which may have been inflicted by her killer, received by falling or bumping into something, or a combination of factors. Anything could have happened to her during the roughly 30 hours between her abduction and the time of her murder, making a total of about 38 hours between her abduction and murder and Faber finding her body. A gunshot wound to her head ended her life. The shotgun blast struck her in the left temple with enough force to expand or deform her head somewhat, but did not cause any exit wounds. There is speculation that the shell may have been old, perhaps a wax-coated paper shell that may have gotten wet or perhaps an improper reload. Although possible, without any official information available due to not having access to a complete autopsy report. This is just speculation. Shotgun wounds vary due to a number of possibilities. I will be looking into finding more information if possible and going into greater depth in another video if I find new information. For now, I will present a short presentation on shotgun ballistics, but I do not want to bog this video down with too much detail. First, we do not know the gauge of shotgun used. Second, we do not know the size of shot being the pellets within the shell, used or the length of shell, which would increase or decrease the number of pellets within the shell. Third, we do not know the distance the shooter was from Joanne. Fourth, we do not know the shotgun's details, such as barrel length, choke, etc. These factors affect the terminal ballistics of a wound. Without going into great detail, let's compare two of the most popular shotgun gauges, 20 gauge and 12 gauge. Gauges seem backwards in their size and power, with the higher number 20 gauge being smaller and less powerful than the 12 gauge. The larger 12 gauge shell is packed with more shot than the 20 gauge, shot of course being the BB-like pellets discharged when firing the shotgun. Shell size also factors in. For instance, using just the 12 gauge as an example, a 2 3/4 length shell would obviously have fewer pellets than a 3-inch shell. The 3-inch shell would also have more power because it would also be packed with more gunpowder. The size of pellets would also factor into the damage caused. Bird shot would have more pellets than buckshot, but would be less powerful, lose its energy quicker, and would not penetrate as deeply. Being shot in the head with a birdshot shell may not result in a lethal wound beyond close range, even if many pellets hit the victim. A buckshot wound to the head at close range would be devastating and still lethal at longer ranges, even if fewer pellets struck the victim due to spread. We also have to factor in the distance of the shooter to the victim. For instance, at close range a birdshot wound to the head would probably still be lethal, and at such closer ranges you would also have to factor in the burns and significant tissue damage caused by the superheated gases and pressure wave discharged when firing the gun. The greater the distance from the shooter, the less the gases and pressure would come into play. A far enough distance and the gases, heat, and pressure wave would not be a factor at all. I have not heard of burns or other damage done to Joanne due to the heat from gases during discharge. We also need to remember there are other components to a shotgun shell such as the wad. The wad is a plastic apparatus that divides the shot from the powder. It also exits the barrel along with the shot during discharge and can cause injury and even be impacted into a wound at short range. Even at ranges longer than a wad would penetrate, it could still leave an abrasion on the flesh. It is unknown if Joanne had any wounds that might have been caused by a wad. Finally, we have to discuss spread. Spread is the widening distance between pellets after leaving the barrel. The greater the size of spread, the farther the victim is from the shooter. Spread can be controlled by barrel length and choke. A longer barrel will help hold a tighter spread pattern, and the type of choke used will also help control the spread at increasing distances. Keeping the spread tight increases the devastation of a wound, even a non-lethal wound, at a distance. That said, we still have to remember that even a tight pattern of birdshot will lose its lethal energy much quicker than buckshot would. I have not brought up slugs. Slugs at very close range would do extreme devastation to a human head, as would buckshot. But even at a greater distance, a slug would still cause massive damage, but buckshot's devastation would be minimized somewhat due to spread. Now that we've pondered the possibilities of the lethal shotgun wound, let's get back to the crime scene. Pistachio seed shells were also found at the dump site, just as they were from Joanne's Vega. With the dump site probably already contaminated by sightseers, Martin County authorities decided to call in a medical examiner from Estherville in Emmett County, Iowa, due south of Martin County, Minnesota. In later years, two of Nutt's biggest regrets with how he handled the investigation was that he did not control the area better and did not have the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, BCA, do the initial autopsy. The BCA crime lab medical examiners and their greater forensic expertise might have found evidence overlooked or contaminated by the lesser-trained examiner from Iowa. Later, the BCA would do their own autopsy, but initially, investigators would have to settle with the findings compiled by the Estherville medical examiner. It is not known what evidence was collected, but it was determined that Joanne had not been raped. A DNA sample was retrieved at some point and testing was done as recently as the spring of 2024. It is not known what form of sample was taken, blood, saliva, semen, etc., or from where on Joanne's body it was recovered, or if it was recovered from something found at the scene such as the pistachio shells. It should be noted that this DNA sample may not belong to the killer, it could be from anyone, so even if someone is not a match for the DNA, it does not completely clear them, it only confirms that the DNA from that sample is not theirs. It is unknown what evidence was collected, but Joanne was held for a long period of time. We don't know when Joanne's clothes were removed, but her shoes were found with her car. During the time of her captivity, she would have collected samples from wherever she walked on the bottoms of her feet, from gravel at the location of her car, to dirt or anything on the floor where she was held. If in a house, there might have been fibers from carpets or rugs. If in a barn, shed, or garage there could have been animal feed, fertilizer, grain dust, oil, etc. that may have left samples on her feet or body. If she had her clothes on, they could have picked up such samples. Or if she had been stripped down to her panties, perhaps her panties held such evidence. Perhaps that is why her clothes had been removed, or perhaps to keep her from trying to escape. It would have been cold enough overnight to make an escape attempt dangerous, especially from a location probably unknown to her. Having no shoes would have made an escape attempt even more difficult and dangerous. Did Joanne try to escape? We'll never know unless the killer is caught and tells the tale. But why was she held for so long before being killed? It's possible that she knew her killer, or he knew her. Some of Joanne's friends said she had a stalker, and there was the suspicious customer whose hair Joanne didn't want to do. There was a mysterious caller phoning local beauty shops in the area around the time of Joanne's murder. Young women in the area reported strange encounters with police, such as police officers following them or parking in front of their homes at night. There were reports that sometimes a blue uniformed man would pull them over and make sexual advances. Was it a police officer or someone dressed like one? Obtaining a police uniform and fake badge is not difficult, even today. And those days it was not hard to get magnetic police lights that could be placed on top of a car. That said, there were murders and child molesters working in law enforcement at that time and area. Case in point: Robert Leroy Nelson. He had served as a Minnesota State Trooper in Minnesota District 2200 from 1970 to 1981, and then transferred to District 2900 until he found God at his new church called Into the Light Ministries. He was so devoted to this church that he moved his family to Texas in 1985 when the church relocated there. Before people start to think that this is a heartwarming story of a man finding his faith, it must be said that Nelson was a pervert and murderer. He was physically and sexually abusing his son since the boy was 2 years old. After being confronted by his minister, Nelson ran to Mexico. After more discussions with his minister, he returned and confessed, not just to the abuse of his son, but that he had been involved in at least one, perhaps more, murders when he had been a state trooper, but he had suppressed his memories that sometimes surfaced as what he called visions. After sending him back to Minnesota, and putting Nelson through an interrogation that included the use of sodium pentothal, hypnosis, and a lie detector test, he confessed to the rape and murder of a young woman whose unidentified body was found near Blue Earth, Minnesota in 1980. It wouldn't be until 2015, 35 years later, that the victim would be identified as 18-year-old Michelle Busha. Nelson is currently serving a life sentence, albeit with the possibility of parole, for the aggravated sexual assault of his son, and first-degree manslaughter for the murder of Michelle Busha. But he also said he had been involved in Joanne's murder as well, but once again, He claimed to have suppressed memories and recalled events only as visions. Nelson did have knowledge of Joanne's murder. He was serving as a state trooper in the area at the time, and had been on scene at the dump site investigation. Nelson pointed the finger at another state trooper, Rodney Johnson. Johnson taught classes to rookie patrolmen and acted as a field training officer. Perhaps he taught the rookie Nelson to be more than a trooper, but also helped him unlock his sicker tendencies, because the two troopers seemed to be two peas in a pod. Johnson was a pervert too. He pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree intrafamilial sexual abuse perpetrated against his daughter. He had not only sexually abused her, but also took nude photos of the little girl. He got it easier than Johnson though. He was sentenced to serve 65 months, but the 65-month sentence was stayed, reduced to 20 years probation and a year in county jail. Nelson promised to give more details about Joanne's murder, under one condition: he be transferred to prison in Minnesota. Minnesota officials denied his request. Nelson is still serving his sentence in Texas. Authorities did check Nelson's DNA, and it was not a match to the sample collected. That said, Nelson shouldn't be considered cleared of Joanne's murder. The killer might not have left the DNA sample. Robert Leroy Nelson has been up for parole a few times in the past, most recently in May of 2024. It was denied, but he will be up for parole again in May 2027. Rodney Johnson died in 2024. So, there were sexual predators and a proven murderer working in law enforcement in the area. And Joanne's mother believed her killer was probably an officer of the law. Joanne had often told her that she would never pick up a stranger, and Joanne's friends confirmed this. Suspicions continue to this day that law enforcement was directly or indirectly involved, directly by an officer being the murderer and indirectly by covering it up for someone in a position of power. One thing that points to it possibly being a law enforcement officer is that someone controlling the search would know when the search would begin and where searchers were so that they could safely dump her body. Others discredit that an officer of the law was involved, saying that investigators reasonably did what they could at the time. Some speculate that the reason the killer has never been caught is because it was someone just passing through. Others say it was a local. Personally, I think it was a local. The killer must have had a private, secure location to keep her. He would have had complete control of the location, most likely a rural location, far enough from other houses that any possible screams would not have drawn attention. This could have been a house, barn, or shed on property he owned or rented or had control over. If it were an abandoned property, he would have most likely been the owner. It is possible an employee or hired hand of a farmer might have been staying at an old farmhouse owned by his employer. But someone like that would have needed knowledge of the area and locals. Remember, she would have been held at this location for around 30 hours. Someone passing through would most likely have been staying at a motel or campground. Such locations would not have been secure. Why did the killer dump her where he did? There are better locations nearby where she would not have been found so quickly, perhaps not for days or months, possibly years if ever. The dump site location ensured that she would be found within hours after being dumped there. Was it simply an area of quick convenience, or did dumping her there have meaning? Lack of blood at the site suggests Joanne was murdered in a different location, either where she had been held or had been transported there just to kill her. If the shot heard at the Faber farm was the kill shot, and the timeline and school bus witness suggest a high possibility that it was, she would have been either held nearby and murdered at that location, or moved from the location in which she was held, shot nearby at another location, and then had her body moved to where it was found. Shooting her at the location where she was held would have necessitated removal of her body to another location. Even if the killer owned the land, storing her body or digging her grave on location would have been too risky with the search going on. This is another reason to suggest that the holding location was near the geographic area where her car had been abandoned to where her body had been dumped, probably a radius of no more than several miles. If she had been moved from her holding location to where she was shot, why wouldn't her killer have just left her body there? Moving a dead body would have created additional risks, especially since there was an ongoing search at the same time. And if the shot heard by the Fabers was the kill shot, the killer didn't move the body far from where she had been shot. This suggests that he wanted to place her at this location. A place that had some meaning to him, or that he wanted to make a statement by placing her there. So, was the dump site a place of convenience or place of statement? We many never know. Another thing to ponder about the lack of significant blood at the dump site is the blood that would have been at her murder site and the blood that would potentially have been left in the vehicle transporting her corpse. Two things happened after Joanne's murder that are suspicious. The first thing occurred only days after her murder. A fire burned down what was described as a barn or shed on an abandoned farm 2 miles east of Sherburn. An article said that the farm was the Hank Hendricks farm. It was said in a Fairmont Sentinel article from 1977 that the heavy brick walls fell in on top of the rubble. A photo from that same article shows the heavily overgrown debris in front of an old farmhouse. Compare that with an on-location photo showing the blaze underway in 1975. Either the shed was set off in a less wooded area from the house, and the photo from the later article was taken from a different angle, or these are two different locations. Sherburn Police Chief Robert Floor had checked several abandoned farms in the area, but failed to search that one because though it was still inhabited. Floor said of the burned shed, "That's the one thing that bothers me, that maybe we missed a chance." Another thing that is heavily debated among researchers is a report of a car being buried on a nearby farm. The car was to have been about 10 years old at the time and was said to be in running order, although it needed some work. Some think this is suspicious, while others say it was not out of the ordinary to bury old cars. I do think it is odd why someone would go to all the trouble to bury a car they could have sold to someone to work on or even get a few bucks from a junkyard. At any rate, authorities were notified where the car is buried and said that if they need it, they know where it is at. If they ever do dig it up, I hope they compare its tire tracks to any photos or castings made of the tire tracks found in front of Joanne's Vega when it was abandoned on Highway 4. Whenever researching a case, it would be impossible to include every theory. And in a divisive case such as this, everyone seems to have a theory. Was it a police officer? Was law enforcement covering for a wealthy person or persons? Dead bodies are heavy. It is highly likely that more than one person was involved. Then there is always the possibility of preconceived notions influencing an investigation. A Fairmont Sentinel article summed the sentiment up with this statement. Some speculate that Miss Bontjes' apparent aloofness toward the advances of men coming, as it did from an attractive young woman, might have goaded the killer into abducting her. Gerald Nutt, the closest thing to a lead investigator at that time, added his own preconceived notions to the case in the same article. He says that his investigation has been impeded by a romanticization of the victim on the part of those who knew her, a tendency to depict her through rose-colored glasses. He would not discount the possibility of some sort of personal involvement between victim and killer. Victim blaming is still common today, but was even worse back in the 70s. Blaming Joanne for not wanting to succumb to the advances of anyone who wanted her is a sexist notion at best, but at worst when adding such notions to a murder investigation. Joanne didn't owe anyone anything, especially her body. She had every right to turn down any and all advances. And to say this may have goaded her murderer to commit his heinous acts against her is a sickening statement. Nutt's statement about her being viewed through rose-colored glasses is also sickening and most likely stems more from his own feelings and preconceived notions than looking at the facts. His notions are discrediting the statements of those who knew her best. Joanne's own mother believed her statements to police were not seriously considered. From the same article. They wouldn't believe anything I'd tell them. They said she got in another car and went with her boyfriend. I said I know my daughter better than that. She was either stopped by a highway patrolman or somebody acting as a cop or somebody that she knew. While it is possible that Joanne was seeing someone casually from time to time, she was a 21-year-old woman, not a child. This was the mid-70s, and it has well been established that she did not have a serious boyfriend. But that would be no reason for investigators to engage in victim blaming. How Joanne lived her life was her business and hers alone. She did nothing to deserve the horrendous fate that befell her between October 2nd and 3rd, 1975. 50 years. 50 years of delayed justice. But someone knows who killed her. It's time they talked. This is an ongoing investigation, and I will put up additional videos should information become known. There were numerous murders of teenage girls and young women in Minnesota around the time Joanne was killed. Most of them are unsolved. It would be interesting to look into more of them and see if there are any possible connections. I will put links to 2 different Facebook pages that discuss this case. One is by a retired police chief from St. James, Minnesota, Donovan Mickelson, who has been researching this case for years. And the other is a tie-in to the book, Better the Devil You Know, by Katherine Clymer. I have researched both Facebook pages and book, as well as newspaper articles and other online sources, and put links to many of them below. I will leave it up to you, the viewer, to examine the evidence and theories presented here and elsewhere and come to your own conclusions.